Each evening, the lights adorning the many theaters and performance venues in Altoona would flicker to life, signifying that the show would begin soon. Early theater owners knew that the performing arts were a vital part of a cultured community and that there was no shortage of them to provide an evening's entertainment. At any given time during its heyday, dozens of theaters were in operation at once, all vying for the patrons' money and attention. Altoona's performing arts scene became so widely respected that it once served as a testing ground for popular variety entertainers, associated with an era that is widely known as the heart of American show business.
Altoona, from its inception, had 100 theaters. But early on, theaters were never really financially successful. So people who built them would tend to put them on the top floor of a building, and therefore they could rent the first floor and the second and third floor to commercial establishments. And the theater would be on the top floor and would be opened maybe on the weekend or a couple times a week or something like that. And you could tell those buildings today that are still standing, because if you look up, the top floor, the windows are taller than the rest of the floors. That's a giveaway that there's a big room up there that was used for meetings or theaters. The Jaffa Shrine brought in very famous German opera singers singing German opera, and they would give recitals at the old Jaffa Mosque. And then later on, around the turn of the century, by 1905, they started opening up silent film theaters. These are usually one-story buildings. One of the oldest was the Palace Theater in Altoona, opened up by two German immigrant gentlemen. And when these two brothers, toward the end of their career, built the Strand Movie Theater in 1916, which was probably the most magnificent theater in Altoona. The building was all steel, it was fireproof. To get up to the balcony was a huge sweeping ramp, all marble. The lobby was immense. It stretched, I would say, a good 100 feet inside. Its backstage was not deep for live performances. So in 1961, it was demolished for urban renewal. But the theater that did survive was the Mishler Theater. So out of 100 theaters, the big movie theaters and so forth, the Mishler survived. It was not built as a movie theater. It was built as a stage in 1905. Mr. Isaac Mishler built it. He spared no expense. It was, he claimed, fireproof. It was built in an ornate style with carved cherubs on the walls and ceilings and angels here and carved plaster. It was all gold leafed. It was really beautiful with a massive chandelier in the center. But that theater burnt down in the first year. It was opened in February. In October it burnt. Why did it burn? The building next door was also brand new. It was a 5-story furniture store. So it was stuffed full of 5 floors of stuffed upholstery, which was shipped in those days in big crates with sawdust type material to pack them in. So this was all in that store, and one morning at 4 in the morning, the custodian was cleaning and he smelled something burning, and he went downstairs to find out what was going on, and there was a fire, probably internal combustion, started in the sawdust and the packing materials. The fire was so intense, it went out the back of the furniture store, and the window to the back stage at the 2nd floor height, the window was broken with the heat. The fire went into the back of the theater behind the curtain. Mr. Mishler had put an asbestos curtain in, because in those days fires usually started in theaters on the stage where they stored the scenery. Scenery was very flammable. So the scenery caught fire, but instead of the asbestos curtain preventing the fire from going into the auditorium of the theater, The asbestos curtain was hung on a wooden rod, so the wooden rod burnt. The asbestos curtain fell, and the fire spread to the entire theater. Mr. Mishler rebuilt that theater starting in October, and he opened it up, I think it was the 1st of February the following year. So he rebuilt it very quickly. The walls stood, the brick walls. That theater became a movie theater in the 1920s, and then by the 1930s, it had been reduced to a second-rate theater showing old cowboy films because the other theaters in town had come along, movie theaters that were built and were much bigger and fancier and ultimately air-conditioned and what have you. So with Altoona's redevelopment in the 60s and 70s, they literally tore down all the theaters downtown. The Mishler escaped that fate by a movement of people within the town to save it, and ultimately it was restored to its original magnificence and still stands to this day. Vaudeville shows were usually performed in towns outside of New York first to test them out, to see if they could withstand Broadway. So they would go to towns like Philadelphia or some other large town. But in 1914, they picked Altoona as the test town. So Altoona was the off-Broadway show place for shows going to Broadway. And that was because the vaudeville stars were performing in New York, and then the next stop would be ultimately Chicago. So they would ride the train, have to pass through Altoona, maybe midweek on the train, and they would get off the train for an overnight stay at a hotel that was close to the Mishler Theater, and the Orpheum Theater was another theater a block away. The Orpheum was on the Keith Vaudeville circuit, so it routinely got Broadway shows. Mr. Mishler booked them individually, so they weren't routinely getting all the Broadway shows, but they got a lot. So the Ethel Barrymores and the Lillian Russells and the George Burns of their day, the big stars, all played in Altoona because they were stopping on a train overnight or for some other reason, came to Altoona and performed. So Altoona was well known as a theater town.